FAMU has lost Anthony Dunn to the transfer portal, and because of the edge rusher's prototypical build, I'm really interested to see what his next destination will be. Oh yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU, your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because that mic cuts off, and it will, unfortunately, does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode, we'll be closing it out with a look at what I'm really interested in is what will be UAPB's next move. But then also Margaret Richards, who was the former Alabama A&M head coach, has now moved on to her next work opportunity. Prior to that, we'll look at FAMU in two different ways. In segment 2, we'll be looking at what will be FAMU's 2024 identity, because that's my biggest question as we go into their 2024 spring game. But we kick it off with a big player that they just lost, and that is Anthony Dunn. And for me, Anthony Dunn's next landing spot is one to watch. I don't really have a guess, an educated prediction on what will happen next. I think that there's a couple of ways that this could go, but the dynamic pass rusher has entered the transfer portal. And it's important to remember, there's always an opportunity for him to come back. James Colzie made sure to say that. But with the timing of it, one could say that Anthony is done at FAMU. Let me get my dad at. Get it. Anthony Dunn. Anthony's done at FAMU. Dad jokes deserves dad hats. All right, there we go. Now I'm excited. Now we can really cook. All right, because now I got the Saints on, so you know we about to go. But in all seriousness, when you look at Anthony Dunn and why I'm excited for it, I was supposed to have this hat ready, but then I saw it over there. I was like, oh, yeah, let's get it. But when you look at Anthony Dunn to me has the prototypical size that I feel like you don't always see at HBCUs. A lot of times HBCU players are the guys who they're a little bit undersized. That's probably one of the reasons that they were overlooked in their high school recruiting process. Maybe, and that's one of the things you see a lot. And we'll focus on those players. Anthony Dunn, on the other hand, is 6'4", 250. 6'4", 250 as an edge rusher with speed is a really good size for today's NFL. Let me use this as a comparison to a former FAMU pass rusher who was very decorated, and that's Isaiah Land. Isaiah Land was 6'4" at FAMU. He ended up being like 6'3" and some change. But he was 6'4", 225. He had to put on 10 pounds prior to the combine to get to 235. When we're speaking about size, that's not a big edge rusher, man. Like, this is somebody who a lot of folks thought was going to have to convert to a 3-4 outside linebacker, you know, and with Dunn and his size, yes, 250 may be best suited for a 3-4 outside linebacker, but at the same time, I've seen a Brian Burns. And the biggest part about this for me is Dunn's only a junior, just got done with his sophomore season, which means he still has 2 more years of eligibility. This is a 6'4", 250-pound junior. Easily, in the right strength and conditioning program, he can get to a healthy 255, 260. No questions. And if he can maintain that speed, that when I say healthy, obviously you don't want it to be fat, but then also you want him to maintain his speed because that is what he does. I think that you can get Anthony Dunn to a speedy 6'4", 257, 258. And now you're looking at a guy like Dallas Turner out of Alabama. That's his dimensions. Of course, Alabama makes everything look a little bit better, but that's his dimensions. When you look at a guy like TJ Watt, he's in the 50s. But if you can get Dunn to a 260, and it's just important to remember prospect. That's the operative word. Is you're not looking at him being a finished product. You're not looking at him being that right now. He's only had one real starting season under his belt, and that was last year. I was impressed by it. He got off to a really good start. I wish he would have closed a little bit better as far as sack numbers go and whatnot, but he ended up leaving the season with 8 sacks. He ended up leaving with 12 and a half tackles for a loss. And I understand these aren't crazy numbers the way Isaiah Land was, but Dunn is 250 pounds, 6'4". He has good dimensions. I watched him against Howard, and I think his game against Howard was a great example of not judging a pass rusher solely based off of what he does in the box score. I thought he looked good against Howard, personally. From my memory, I remember seeing 58 a couple of times, saying 58, 58, 58, at least 2 to 3 times. He garnered a couple of holding calls, if I'm not mistaken. That was a good example of performing well outside of the box score, right? But just in general, first year as a starter, 8 sacks, 12 and a half tackles for a loss. I can work with that. 250, that's good, even if that's a little bit small for my program, which it probably isn't. But even if that was the case, I trust I can put 5 pounds on you by next year. I trust I can do that. And if I want to get you to 260, you can definitely be that by your senior year. Anthony Dunn, no, he doesn't have 15 sacks. No, he doesn't have 20. He's not a Buck Buchanan Award finalist or anything. But he was a first-year starter who nearly reached double-digit sacks. He's fast. He has great size. Everything about Anthony Dunn says I can do something with him. A couple of years of eligibility, good first-year stats, and amazing build for the position. If I'm a recruiter, I'm looking at Anthony Dunn and I'm saying, hey, coach, can he fit your system? Because I think he has a lot. I think Anthony Dunn is a high ceiling player with a build that will make a lot of people say, can we reach that ceiling? So for that reason, and his years of eligibility left, I want to know where he's going to go. I'll be very, very in tune to see where he's going to go. He's not the only FAMU player to enter the transfer portal, but the fact that the Rattlers have so many players entering the portal actually brings me to my biggest storyline of their spring game. What's going to be their identity? Today's episode is brought to you by ebaymotors.com. And I don't care if you need to go Zoom, right? Like maybe you want to just move faster. Maybe you want to get a little bit of power in your car. Maybe you want to just look better, right? Maybe you just want style, right? Like Boosie, Kanye, Rocky, right? Zoom, power, and style. Like whatever it is, if that's what you want to go with, eBay Motors is your place to be. And I'm just speaking about fixing your car up beyond the basic maintenance, but maybe something's actually wrong with your car. Maybe it actually is not performing well. If that's the case, eBay Motors is there too. It's not only for aesthetics, it's also for utility. So when you look at the utility of it all, eBay Motors has 120 million parts, more than that, for every single car. You're looking at parts for every single car. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna put my 2004 Dodge Challenger into the My Garage section, get all of the parts that are going to fit my car and have the guaranteed fit. But in order to do that, got to go to ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked on Sports today. Let's take this hat off. We're done with that now. Shout out to my nation, though. You know what it is. But let's continue along the FAMU route. Because what I really want to watch in this year's spring game for the Rattlers is how much do things change. I looked at Anthony Dunn. And I looked at the blow that he'll be, 8 sacks, 12 and a half tackles for a loss. But primarily, I looked at what's on the horizon for him. But if you look at what he's leaving, FAMU is losing a lot of talent. And I know just 2 days ago, I got on here and I said, look, FAMU isn't having a Jackson State type of exodus. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm not going to go through and do the math to see how many players they lost, how many starters they lost. I'm not doing all of that. But what I will say is that FAMU does feel like they're losing a lot of talent. Maybe it wasn't the same initial exodus. All of Jackson State kind of felt like they left at the same time. They all entered the transfer portal to be early enrollees for another team spring practice. But when you look at FAMU, these guys getting sprinkled in. So it's like a constant reminder. There are two separate styles of departures. One, everybody right there in front of you is like, God, I just see 50 players enter the portal. But this one is like another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And both end up with this, God, the whole team's gone type of feeling. And we'll see how they're able to replace it. But with all of those players leaving, I wonder how much the FAMU identity is going to change. All these departures plus a completely new head coach who is not an offensive-minded head coach. And though I say that, James Colzie, being a defensive guy, you would think that he would be able to keep the same identity over the last couple of years. And to me, the identity of FAMU for the last 2-3 years was defense first, offense second. That was for me. Even though Willie Simmons was a great offensive head coach, even though Jeremy Musa won the SWAC Player of the Year, all of those things are true. But I always thought about the defense first. I always thought about the dark cloud defense. When I think about star players, I think about a Marquise Bell. I think about an Isaiah Land. And this one is probably more of a personal, but I think about Isaiah Major. And that's because I think Major is a phenomenal player. I genuinely love Isaiah Major's game. So I'll say for the past season, Jeremy Musa was probably the guy that the masses would look at. But for me, I've been a fan of Isaiah Major since he stepped foot in Tallahassee. So I'll just chalk that up to me. But even then, you got Major, you got Hunt, Gentle Hunt, you got Anthony Dunn that we just spoke about. And though Dunn entered the portal, I thought he was going to be the next guy. I thought he was going to be the next guy that was the face of the defense. Gentle Hunt's in the portal too. Like, let's just read some of the players who are in the portal. Obviously, you got Dunn and Hunt, both on the defensive line. You have Kareem Burke, wide receiver. You have Cardell Thomas, offensive lineman. You have Allen Smith, edge rusher, so another defensive line player. Sheriff Say, another defensive line player. Deco Wilson, somebody in the secondary. And then you have Johnny Chaney, who is the linebacker, who I thought was going to be another leader for that program. With Dunn, Hunt, and Chaney, you have three players who arguably could have been the face of your defense in 2024. To lose three players with the ability to be the face of your defense in a given offseason is a tough blow for anybody to swallow. That's going to be a tough blow for anybody to deal with. Like, these things do concern me to a certain degree. To a certain degree, these things do concern me. And it's a high degree. Just to be very clear, it's a high degree because I've thought of the dark cloud defense first for 3 years now. Those have been my favorite players on that team. Bell, Land, and Major. That's been me. But not only are you losing star power, you're losing bodies in the trenches. You're losing Gentle Hunt. You're losing Say. You're losing Wilson. You're losing Dunn. Like, you're losing big-time players on the trenches, and your trenches set the tone for your defense. So now it brings the question of, what will the defense look like? Because that's the identity. Or are now we going to be a more offensive-minded team? Not offensive-minded head coach, but offensive-minded team. Because every guy that I'm thinking about in the transfer portal, they got one defensive back, Tate, out of Florida State. But for the most part, I'm thinking about Rodney Hill. I'm thinking about Asian Cobb. I'm thinking about Quay Davis. Like, I'm thinking about wide receivers. I'm thinking about quarterbacks and Daniel Richardson. I'm thinking about offensive guys in the transfer portal. So am I now going to have a focal point on offense? And that's not to say that the offense wasn't good before, because you had Xavier Smith. You had John Murray Sheree. You had Marcus Riley. You had Jeremy Musa, right? You had Bishop Bonnet. You had Terrell Jennings. Let me take Jennings out, because as good as he was, I don't think that he was a star of the team when he was there. But you have these players that definitely got your attention on offense. It was just the defense was the face of that squad. The dark cloud defense, to me, embodied FAMU, or were the bigger pushes to FAMU than the Rack Boys were. But who gonna be the Rack Boys this year? See, I love stories like this where I can just have a multitude of questions with no answers, because now they give me things to focus on. I can focus on who's going to be the new star of that offense, that defense. Because I remember Isaiah Major's first spring practice, everybody kind of knew, hey, this kid from Oklahoma different. Isaiah Major's first spring practice in there, everybody knew this zero guy is different. I knew it. The writers knew it. I knew it because the writers, but like the coaches knew it. He came in and made a statement immediately. Maybe we'll get somebody like that. Maybe the defense will be good. Maybe the offense is the standout part. Maybe you have the Cobb Robinson, not Robinson, but Richardson combination at quarterback and wide receiver. Who knows? But then also what to watch includes the quarterbacks, because replacing Jeremy Musa is not going to be easy. I don't know if Junior Meritovic is going to be the guy, because people keep saying, yeah, no, man, he's just there because of seniority. He's been there forever. I'm going off of what the writers are telling me. You may not think Junior is the guy. I notice a lot of fans swear up and down they got insider information. I don't know. Maybe they do. But if Gerald Thomas, who is a phenomenal writer for the Tallahassee Democrat, Gerald Thomas does a great job. We've had him on the show before. Phenomenal guest, phenomenal writer. If he's going to tell me it's Richardson and Meritovic, I'm going to go with what Gerald Thomas told me. I'm just going to be honest with you. Okay. But they're bringing in a lot of receivers. I want to see if one of those quarterbacks is able to make a stand. One of those wide receivers is able to take a stand as well. Who's going to be the guy? It's a little less important for the wide receivers because everybody can eat. With quarterbacks, I want to know who separates themselves. Junior, Richardson, who separates themselves from the pack? I'll be looking for that on Saturday. And guys, when it comes to this, we're going to try to continue to play with how we're going to do our coverage on spring games, because I don't know how much previewing we're going to do. I don't know how much previewing versus recap that we're going to do, but we'll see. We'll see. So I appreciate y'all, whatever it is, rocking with me. Go ahead, because for me, this is the most interesting time of the spring. So as we continue pushing, though, on today's episode, we're then going to move on to Margaret Richards, and also the UAPB interim coach as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is the official place for all of your last-minute ticket deals. Procrastination does not kill when Gametime gets involved. It's really just that simple, because say you want to go to a sporting event or a comedy show or a theater play or a concert, right, or anything. That's a lot of things that you could go to. Whatever you want to, it has it on Gametime. Maybe you're in Houston. Let me pick up, see what's going on in Houston, right? I think I'm going to take a trip to Houston at some point soon, hopefully, right? And what's going on in here? And it doesn't matter. It's just that easy. Everything is at your fingertips at a low price. So go ahead and go to the Gametime app, download it from whatever app store you're using. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege. That is LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. That's wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU. I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. I want to look at the UAPB Alabama A&M women's basketball fiasco. It's really not that complicated, but the fallout. There we go. I want to look at that because Margaret Richards is now at Mercer, and she's the reason that all of this has started. And I think it's important because it happened relatively quickly, and she did step down. She chose to step down. I think saying the word chose is even more important now because she ended up being an assistant coach somewhere else. So she went from being a head coach to being an assistant coach. And that's why I think saying the choosing is important, because she chose to do that. And she went to go work with somebody that she's very familiar with, which is Michelle Clark-Hurd. And they worked together at Kentucky State. I guess maybe she just wanted that comfort. I don't know. I think there was an idea that Richards would take a year off at least. But she said, I'm going to take a couple months off. I'm right back to it. So whatever. That first domino that fell led to Don Thornton being able to come out and go to Alabama A&M. And everybody's excited about that. I think that's a big deal. It's not a good riddance to Richards type of situation. Excuse me. It's not a good riddance to her type of situation. But Don Thornton is an exciting part. If you're going to step down, if you're going to lose your coach, getting Don Thornton isn't the worst person to go ahead and get to kind of replace that head coach. So I did want to shine a little bit of light on what she did, Richards did, and where she's going. But then also look at Nicole Mealing, because she's the interim head coach right now for UAPB. Does it stay that way? I don't think I'll ever be okay with it, but I'm coming to accept it. And that's that interim head coaches really do go out, or really don't. Yeah, they really do go out and get their own season to essentially prove it. I hate it. I don't think it makes any sense, to be honest. Right? Like, go get a coach. Like, the framework and frame of reference that I come from, this wouldn't happen. So I'll just be honest with you. And I wasn't looking at coaching in college ranks. Like, this isn't even I don't even know if this is an HBCU thing, to be honest. But for me being an NFL guy, you would never see them get an interim head coach in the off season and then keep him interim for the rest of that season. It just wouldn't happen. And that's my frame of reference on how I learned the sport and how I learned a lot of things. Okay. Even though we're talking about basketball versus football, you wouldn't see that in the NBA either. All that being said, I'm coming to accept that this does happen frequently, and I'm not going to continue to express how weird it is to me. I'll leave that alone. But I think that might be the case here, because Alabama A&M went through their coaching search, and they went and they got Don Thornton, which means now UAPB has to go through their coaching search. When the Bulldogs wanted a coach, they wanted to name somebody by Final Four weekend, because that's when the movers and shakers are around. That's when all the things happen, right? But let's put it this way. They took UAPB's coach at that time. That was their optimal moment. Alabama A&M went through an entire coaching search just to take UAPB's head coach, and now they have to go through an entire coaching search. And that's the part to look at, right? So they might take a couple of weeks, but when they take a couple of weeks, now we're looking at the middle of April. Things ain't as sweet now. Maybe looking at the beginning of May. Options are looking a little, So I think for that reason, you may just say, we would like to get a coach at the closer to the end of the regular season. The only way to do that is to allow this interim to rock out for a year and see what she can do. And this isn't Mealing's first time being an interim head coach, right? She did the same thing at East Carolina. And in her 1 year as an interim coach, she was able to win in the first round of the conference tournament. And I think one of the reasons that she set up well to be an interim, kind of a bridge coach, so to speak, is that she's an assistant coach. So for the players who are already there was a position of authority that was attached with her. Yes, you have coach, you have staff members, but there was a position of authority attached to Mealing in 2023/24. But then also she's a recruiting coordinator. So I would trust my recruiting coordinator to put together a solid recruiting class to kind of bridge me over. And it won't be great, because I don't think a lot of high recruits are going to come to an interim situation. But yet and still, I think that Mealing is set up in a good way to excel in a bad situation. Whether that's her assistant coach, whether that's her recruiting coordinator status, both of those things put together, and the fact that she's done this before, she's taken over a program before. All of that tells me that, yeah, Mealing is a person who can at least maybe salvage a respectable season in 24-25. So I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. We'll have our spring game recaps next week. We'll see how we do it. I'm still trying to understand how I'm going to go about each one. So I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.